Now that we have a base image, the next step is to copy the application files into the image. So for that, we have two instructions. One is copy, the other is add. They have the exact same syntax, but add has a couple additional features. We'll talk about that later in this lesson. So let's start with copy. With this, we can copy one or more files or directories from the current directory, meaning this directory over here, into the image. So we cannot copy anything outside of this directory. Here's the reason. When we execute the build command, look at the last argument. A period means the current directory. So when we execute this command, Docker client sends the content of this directory to Docker Engine. This is called the build context. So Docker client sends the build context to Docker Engine, and then Docker Engine will start executing these commands one by one. So at that point, Docker Engine does not have access to any files or directories outside of this directory, okay? So here we can copy one or more files. For example, we can copy package.json into /app into the image. Now, if this directory doesn't exist, Docker will automatically create it. We can also copy more than one file. So we can say readme.md. And by the way, remember, this is case sensitive because under the hood, we are using Linux. Now here we have a syntax error. Look, when using copy with more than one source file, the destination must be a directory and end with a /. So here we need to add a /. Okay. We can also use patterns. So let's say we want to copy all files that start with package and end with JSON. So whatever comes in between, we don't care. That's why we're using a wildcard. So in this directory, we have two files that match this pattern. We have package-lock.json and package.json. Package.json, as I told you before, includes the list of dependencies and their versions. But the actual versions that might be installed on this machine might be a little bit different from what we see here. So package-lock.json keeps track of the exact version of these dependencies installed on this machine, okay? Now, what if you want to copy everything in the current directory into the app directory? We use a period. So this is all about source files and directories. Now, let's talk about the destination. So here we're using an absolute path because our path starts with a /. We can also use a relative path if we set the working directory first. So using the work there instruction, we can set the working directory. Now, all the instructions that come after will be executed inside this working directory. And with this, we can replace this absolute path with a relative path. So we can use a period, meaning the current directory, okay? Now, one last thing about copy. What if you want to copy a file that has a space in it? So let's say we have a file called helloworld.txt. Look, we immediately get a syntax error. This is where we use the other form of the copy instruction. So copy has another form where we can pass an array of strings. So multiple strings. Each string represents an argument of the copy instruction. So here, we're going to wrap all these arguments inside brackets. Then we're going to wrap the first item, which is our source file, in double quotes. Then we add a comma and wrap the second argument in double quotes. It's not a form that you use that often, but I thought to cover it to make this lesson comprehensive. So let's simplify things. We're going to copy everything in our context directory, which is the current directory, into the current working directory of the image. Okay. Now, we also have add. It has the exact same syntax as copy, but add has two additional features. With add, we can add a file from a URL. So here we can type HTTP, some URL, and let's say some file.json. So if you have access to this file, we can add it to our image. The other feature is that if we pass a compressed file, add will automatically uncompress this into a directory. So you can use either of these instructions, but the best practice is to use copy because it's more straightforward. There is no magic around it. Use add only if you need one of these additional features. If you want to add a file from a URL, or if you want to uncompress a compressed file. So let's get rid of this. We're going to copy everything in the current directory into our image. So let's go ahead and rebuild our image. All right, now look at this line. Transferring context. So all the files and directories in our current directory are being sent to Docker Engine. All right, the image is built. So let's start a container with this image. Docker run interactive, React app. We're going to run shell so we can look at the file system. Okay, look, we're inside the app directory because in our Docker file, we set this directory as the current working directory. Now let's run ls. So here you can see all the files and directories we have in our project, including node modules. So this is all about copying files. Now, what if you want to exclude some files or directories? We'll talk about that next.